Ba-da-ba-bum. Hey everybody, get in here. Come on in here. Happy Martin Luther King Day. Do we add the junior? Yeah, Martin Luther King Jr. Day. I'm celebrating it by drinking delicious coffee. Those of you who would like to join me and toast to Martin Luther King Jr., please lift a glass. Oh, that's good coffee. I'm drinking it black, and that's because I care. All right. I love the color on me. Well, thank you. I'd like to, I promised in the title of this Periscope that I would reduce racism in this country by 30% with one Periscope. It might take more than one Periscope, but I'm an optimist. Let me ask you this. What two organizations do we know of in this country that believe the president is a racist? There are more than two, but there are two that are interesting. One group that feels he's a racist, mostly because of immigration stuff, is the KKK and white nationalists. And so people say, can you explain to me why all the racists seem to be Republicans and supporters of President Trump? Now, the bad argument, if you don't like that, the bad argument against it is, well, back 100 years ago, the Democrats were, the KKK. But it's not 100 years from now. And I don't care what happened more than 20 years ago. That's my basic rule. Anything that happened more than 20 years ago, just discount that to nearly nothing. At the moment, the KKK is pro-Trump. And so people say, well, doesn't that mean something? Well, I'm not a mind reader, but let's extend the argument. What network, what television news network is the KKK watching to conclude that the president is a racist? Are they watching Fox News and learning from Fox News that President Trump is a big old racist? Well, I don't think so, because Fox News really says the opposite whenever they can. So Fox News and the racists don't seem to have much in common in that sense, because one says he's a racist, one says he isn't. But CNN reports pretty much nonstop, as does MSNBC, that the president is a racist. So CNN's point of view and the racist point of view on this topic are the same. So does that make CNN racist because they agree with the racists on this important topic? No, not really. But anytime you have these, guilt by association things, you need to be careful. Now, let me make a case that will probably be the end of whatever's left of my career. now that I've reduced my income and got rid of most of my friends, I'm free. I'm like Jeff Flake. I can say any fucking thing I want. Sorry, I vowed to swear less. So let me revise that to any darn thing I want. I can say, because I already paid the price, so I get a free pass. So let's talk about the reasons. Well, let me put this in a different package. Hypothetically, for every amount of real racism there is in the country, there should be, because of the way brains are wired, an extra 30% on top of that looks like racism but is confirmation bias, right? So racism is real. It really exists. But however big it is, and it's hard for me to judge, but however big it is, there's an extra 30% that would be guaranteed to be tacked onto it to make it seem bigger based on confirmation bias, because that's how all human brains are wired. I'm picking 30% just to make a point. Could be 40, could be 10. But 30% feels about right. And let's talk about that. What sorts of things could be the imaginary type that's on top of the real type? Let me give some examples. Here are some cognitive traps that we have. One of them is that the critics of the president have run out of weapons. So they tried he's incompetent, but the economy is doing well, and ISIS and the courts, and you can go down the list. It seems that the president has done a really good job on most of the big issues, with the exception, it's a glaring exception, of race relations, where even I have given him a report card grade of F. I give him an F for race relations, which is different from reading his mind. So I try not to read his mind, because I can't, but I can observe what's the mood of the country and how things have changed, and I'd say I'd give him a flat F for race relations, but a good grade on other stuff. President Trump gets an F in race relations, but very good grades on economics and fighting ISIS and stuff. Now let me give you some context. There's something that I know that most of you have not had the experience of, and therefore you could not know. One of the things I know is that I get accused of being a racist about 7 times a day. So I personally am accused by people who don't know me and haven't really looked at the body of things I've written, certainly don't know what's in my mind, certainly don't know anything about my lifestyle. They don't know choices I've made in my life or anything else. But a lot of people are absolutely positive that I'm a racist. Now, what I know, but you can't know, because you have no way to verify this, I know what's in my head. I know what I've done, I know how I've lived, I know how I feel, etc. So I know how many people are wrong when they say I'm a racist, because I have the advantage of knowing what's in my head, what I've done, what I haven't done in my life. So for many people it would seem, well, it's impossible we could be so wrong when the signs are so obvious. But my personal experience is people call me a racist 7 to 20 times a day on social media, and they're positive. They are positive they're right. Now here are some of the cognitive traps they fall into, and I've made a little list of them. One of them is what I call the mind-reading illusion. So that's the illusion, and really we all fall into this, so I'm not picking out anybody in particular. This is just how people think. So the mind-reading illusion is that you can look at what people say in public or do and know what's in their minds. Nobody can do that, and we've been reminded recently by the American Psychiatric Association, who were so offended by members of their own group publicly saying that the president was crazy, that they had to issue, this is fairly unusual, they had to issue a statement saying that that's pseudoscience. So according to the American Psychiatric Association, even trained professionals can't know what's in a stranger's head from a distance. Now, how much chance do non-trained experts have of reading somebody's mind when even the experts say it's not a thing, it's pseudoscience, you can't do it? So I would say you'd have to be a science denier to imagine that you know what's happening in a stranger's head, even if the stranger is the president, and even if you've seen so many things that you think tell you for sure that he's a racist. According to the American Psychiatric Association, can't be done. It's not a thing. It just feels like it's a thing. All right, so it's one of our many cognitive illusions. Here's another one. I'll call this the illusion of complete context. And this is related to the fact that if you can't imagine a second explanation for a set of facts, you will feel complete certainty that the set of facts mean only one thing. But there are two possibilities. One is that you're right. The set of facts mean exactly what you think they mean. The other is you couldn't imagine another possibility, but there is one. All right? Let me give you an example. When President Trump famously said about the Charlottesville protesters, he said that there are some very fine people there. Now, the people who believe he's a racist say, my God, he just called white nationalists very fine people. How else can you, there's no other way to interpret that. There are zero other ways to interpret that. Well, I would say that's a failure of imagination. Now, I don't know what was in his head. But the most common explanation would be that the president didn't have control of all the facts, meaning that it was a demonstration about statues. I mean, it was, the central demonstration was about statues in the South, and the president was in favor of keeping the statues, which I disagree with completely, by the way, because I think they're offensive and they're just decorations. If you have an offensive decoration, take it down. You don't change history because the history books are history. The statue is not history. That's a decoration. Take it down. So that's my point of view. But the president's point of view is that he wanted to preserve cultural history, whatever. I think he's wrong. But that's not exactly racist. So when he said there are some fine people there, what is it more likely? Ask yourself which is more likely. Is it more likely that he simply didn't have the information and he thought that there were some people there who were just ordinary Republicans who like to keep their statue? Right? It turns out that there were a few people like that. There was a small group of people who did a YouTube clip, and they were free speech absolutists who were there to argue that the statues should stay for free speech reasons. I don't agree with them either. But they were very anti-racist. So they hate the white nationalists. They had their own group was diverse. But the president didn't know they were there. He just assumed, without benefit of all the facts, that there probably were some just regular Republicans there who like statues. So what is more likely? Do you believe that the president decided to say in public that he sided with white nationalists who were literally marching and saying anti-Semitic things, while his own daughter is a converted Jew? A lot of his closest advisors his grandkids are converted Jews. Not converted, his grandkids are Jewish. And he's the same guy who just recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, and Israel loves him, right? So is it likely that he decided to go on television and make common cause with racists versus the alternative scenario that he didn't have command of all the facts before he spoke? Now, every goddamn day, somebody accuses him of not having all the facts. Every goddamn day. So which is the more common explanation? If you can't even imagine that the more likely explanation is he didn't have all the facts before he talked, that's a failure of imagination. Now, do I know what he was thinking? I don't, right? And that's my larger point today is that we can't know what people are thinking. But if you were to analyze the two alternatives, the alternative that he didn't have command of the facts and just made assumption that there were some good people there is that would be the most common explanation. But the fact that he would side with white nationalists and think that somehow that would turn out okay with him and his family, that is very, very, very unlikely. That is so unlikely that it just stretches, it makes my brain hurt to think that anybody thought that he did that intentionally and that that's what actually happened. All right. So, so the point is that a failure of imagination, an inability to imagine there was another explanation for the set of facts, can look just like racism, can look exactly the same. All right. Another thing that looks exactly like racism is insensitivity. I would say it is a fact that President Trump is insensitive about how people feel about race. That's one thing that, that feels like mind reading, except that we see that played out so often that he's insensitive about everything, right? He insults everybody, and he just doesn't care. But the thing is, he's told us directly that he eschews that he doesn't like political correctness. So when you see him acting insensitively, if you imagine the only explanation for that is that he's a racist, well, you've left out the other alternative, which in some cases, this wouldn't apply to every situation we've seen, but in some cases, he just doesn't care that it sounds insensitive. And you see that not just with race, you see that in everything he does. He's just not going to do the politically correct thing because you want him to. He's just not going to do it. Right? So that looks like racism too, but it doesn't necessarily mean it is. What he says, I think he said recently that he's colorblind or something like that. Saying you're colorblind is, first of all, nobody is, but saying that is trying to put the good spin on insensitive. He's sort of universally insensitive, but when it's applied to this one area, it triggers us, and it probably should. So keep in mind also that everything we think about the president is based on reporting. Right? Most of us have not met him. We have not dealt with him personally. We don't have firsthand experience of what's happening in the government. What we know is what the press tells us. Right? By far the dominant part of the press is the anti-Trump part of it. And I said before, they've run out of weapons because he's had a successful first year. So they can't really get him on economics. They can't get him on... They used to get him on chaos in the White House, but apparently that's largely been fixed. They used to be able to get him on leaks, but apparently with Bannon gone, I don't know if that's the cause, but there are fewer leaks. So everything that they used to say about him sort of doesn't work anymore, right? Do you remember when they said he's crazy and incompetent? And then he had that very visual meeting. He let the cameras in for DACA, right? He basically obliterated that argument in 45 minutes. And so what do you have left? Right? The anti-Trumpers have to have a tool, and took away economics, took away fighting ISIS, took away competence, took away court systems, because at least his judges are capable, even if you don't like their direction. All their tools have been one at a time. Let's call them arrows. All the arrows one at a time have been taken away. It's the only one left, and it's because it works best, right? And then there's also a team bias where you think everything your team says is right, and everything the other team says is crazy stuff. So now there's also we have sort of a social prohibition against analyzing the parts of something. Let me give you an example. Suppose you hated Hitler, and you hated everything about him. You hated everything he did. You hated, just freaking everything about Hitler you hated. But you said, there was one thing. I like that little mustache. I don't like that mustache. I'm just making an example. So if you said, I hate everything about Hitler, but that little mustache was kind of cool, you would be called a racist because you like Hitler, right? So there's sort of a prohibition against saying that somebody is doing something right in part. We just don't allow it. So part of the reason I get called a racist 7 to 20 times a day is that I say President Trump's skill as a persuader is insanely good. Lost me. I say his skill as a persuader is insanely good. I say he'll be good for the economy, good for fighting ISIS, good for a few other things. But I give him an F grade in race relations. And I would say I'm very disappointed in that. Could do better. Now, you noticed, now I'm going to make a suggestion. If you were President Trump and somebody was saying you're incompetent, you solve that by having a meeting where you allow the cameras in. It's what he did with the DACA meeting. And you show that you're not. All right? And you do it visually. Now, how could he visually solve for being called a racist? What would be a visual solution for the accusation he's racist? And by the way, I don't read his mind. I don't know what's in there. But if you want to solve it in terms of persuasion, here's my suggestion. I saw a suggestion by Cedric Mohammed saying that he was suggesting that we call Martin Luther King a founder. So rather than saying the founders of the country are a bunch of white guys with wigs, which is what we've been saying for hundreds of years, Cedric suggests, wouldn't it be helpful to extend that and say that Martin Luther King is one of the founders? And my first reaction to that was, you can't go back in time and change what was. But then did I let that sink in a little bit? Yeah, somebody's saying he didn't found anything. So there are lots of rational arguments against that, and I think it would be problematic. But I kind of liked the vibe of it, so I'm gonna take Cedric's idea, and I'm gonna put a spin on it. Here's the spin. Imagine if President Trump decided to remove one of the founders from our money and replace it with Martin Luther King. Yes, could you come back later, maybe?
So in an hour,
Or how about just tonight? We don't need anything today.
Oh,
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you. I'm back. So here's the idea. If you put Martin Luther King on a bill, on money, people are going to see it every day, and they're going to say, "Who did that? Who put Martin Luther King on a bill?" President Trump. Now, would he do that? Well, I doubt it. There are probably lots of reasons not to do it. Blah blah blah. But most of you are Trump supporters. If you're on this Periscope, give me a feel for it. Now, I haven't mentioned who would be replaced. I don't know who that would be, but why not? And the other thing I like about it is when you think of Trump, you think of money. And the thing that Trump is doing on immigration, he's done a poor job of framing this, even though we know this to be true. Having unlimited immigration is good for Trump properties because they hire a lot of people at the low end. If you own a hotel, you're hiring a lot of lower wage people. So it's sort of bad for rich people to limit immigration. But who it's good for is the people who are at the lower rung of the economic ladder in the United States because they have less competition. It should drive up wages at the bottom, etc. So it should be bad for big businesses, should be bad for rich people to limit immigration, but it should be good for black people. It should be. And a great way to capture that would just be to take Martin Luther King and put him on a bill and just sort of codify that thought. He would draw heat if it was anything less than a 20. That's probably true. Replace Franklin. I'm in. Let's replace Franklin. How about put him on a 50 and bump Benjamin Franklin? Yeah, it would be hard to. You don't want to bump Abe Lincoln because Lincoln, freed the slaves essentially, and Washington is kind of, I think Washington is hard to bump just because he was first. But how about Jackson? Yeah. How about what is Grant on the 100? Who's on the 100? Is that Grant? Yeah, Andrew Jackson, Trail of Tears. Now, of course, a lot of people compare President Trump to Andrew Jackson. So he'd be essentially replacing the person he's most associated with Martin Luther King. Well, I like that best then. All right. No replacement due a new bill. What denomination? 1,000? Yeah, I think Grant is on the 50. So I think you could do the 50s most easily. Get rid of Grant, get rid of Jackson, maybe. Either one. Who hates this idea, by the way? It's weird that I haven't seen any. I'm not seeing a lot of pushback on this idea. Right. So that would be, imagine the visual persuasion involved in that. It would make a big difference. All right. So that's my suggestion. Martin Luther King on currency. Well, how about this? I'm just thinking outside the box. It won't be long before cryptocurrencies take over everything. But of course, if you're a cryptocurrency, there's no visual image that is associated with it. It seems to me that there might be some way to put an image on cryptocurrency, at least in terms of branding and logos and stuff like that. So there might be some way to work something in there. Take it to the future. Somebody says bad idea. I think I've seen one person say bad idea. And replacing Jackson, you could make a pretty good argument for that. All right, some people love it. All right, why don't you do this? Do this for me. Most of you are Trump supporters, and most of you are being painted by the same brush as the president is, and you probably don't like it. But you've got social media, you've got some time today, you're probably not working. Maybe tweet around that idea. Let's float it up. See what the country says. Because we need sort of a little bit of healing, right? Let me give you another suggestion. The Super Bowl is coming up. And there's already talk, of course, about who will kneel and whether it will be broadcast, etc. Let me make another suggestion. Suppose the President of the United States, President Trump, said, look, I'd like everybody to enjoy the Super Bowl. So to take the politics out. So how about all the people who were planning to kneel in the Super Bowl, or even the people who have kneeled during the season, I invite you all to the White House for a much bigger spectacle than even television football would give you. I'll make it visual. You can complain. You can complain to my face. You can give me suggestions. I'll even read them. I'll read them on TV. It's not a problem with your free speech. It's not a problem with the things you're asking for, because who knows exactly what the kneelers are asking for. They're kind of non-specific. I mean, generally we know, but we don't know what actions they're asking for. So imagine if the president just said, look, let's take it out of the realm it doesn't work very well, which is sports. Let's put it into the political realm. Come over to the White House. Watch the game with me. What if he just invited all the kneelers to just watch the game with him at the White House? I don't know how many there are. It might be 50 of them. All right, so in terms of how you could deal visually with a problem that's sort of ripping the country, Adams VSG. I might see that. I'd like to see that hashtag. They don't make a 500 bill anymore. All right. When people watch this in replays, depending on how they're watching it, they don't see the comments. So when you see me laughing randomly, it's because somebody said something funny. I don't know. Maybe that was the best idea I've ever had. I didn't think I would get so much support for the Martin Luther King thing. All right. So here's tracking back to my starting point. I said that however much racism there is in the country, we all agree that, I think we all agree, that there is racism. It's a real thing. It's not imaginary or anything. But for every real amount, because of the way our brains are wired, we're going to be seeing more of it than is real. So about 30% on top of whatever it is probably a little bit based on imagination and confirmation bias. And again, I'm talking about racism because that's the topic of the day, but it would apply to anything that people feel, whether they're feeling Republican, feeling Democrat, feeling anything. About 30% of everything they see will not be what it looks like. They'll be biased. So once you understand that, you can reduce your feelings about how bad things are by 30%. Still bad, still need to deal with it. I'm sure all this will be taken out of context tomorrow. But I'm in favor of a Martin Luther King bill. And shout out to Cedric Muhammad for the idea of, the seed idea here. I'd also like to get his ideas on the bill. All right, that's enough for now. Happy Martin Luther King Day, and everybody go off and do something fun today.